it going, Charger fans? It's me again, Jamieson O'Marr, at Chargers Medical on Twitter. I just wanted to come back and give a week 1 injury update for the Los Angeles Chargers and the Miami Dolphins about what we can expect in terms of injuries for the upcoming week. I apologize, it's been a little while since our last update. I'm a 4th-year medical student, for those who don't remember. And the rotation schedules have been quite brutal over the last couple of months, but I should have some more time coming up in the coming weeks and as we get into the season. So I look forward to being available for more injury videos, potentially on a weekly basis moving forward. However, hopefully we don't need as many injury updates as we did last season. That's my ultimate goal and my ultimate hope, as it is, I'm sure, for many of you at home. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So this is the breakdown or the expectation of the things we will discuss today. We'll start with JC Jackson and his recovery and expectations for the season. Just talking about really what to expect. There's been a lot of discussions around that, so I won't go into much about the injury, but we'll just touch briefly on kind of what we should be expecting as fans to see in the coming weeks. We will talk about the Chargers on the PUP list. That's Otito, Ogbonnia, and Jalen Guyton. They are ineligible to return for 4 weeks, so they could potentially come back as early as week 5. But I'll talk a little bit about when realistically we can expect to see them back on the field. We'll talk about Daiyan Henley and his hamstring injury that he suffered in this most recent preseason game against the 49ers, and also what we can expect from him in the coming weeks and to see him back on the field. And finally, we'll talk about the Miami injury report and relevance to things that the Chargers may see in terms of game planning and things like that Staley might be thinking about. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. We've talked at length about JC Jackson's injury. This was a very serious injury. The patella tendon tear is something that 10 to 15 years ago was a career-ending injury. For most professional athletes, particularly football players, and particularly positions in football that require you to really have strong quads and strong explosive quads. So when I talk about that, there are really no good comparisons that we can even draw lines to for JC Jackson. That's what I'm meaning is this is the ability to repair these well and for players to rehab is something that's relatively new. And there are no good comparisons for expectations that we can have for JC Jackson. So when Daniel Popper said in his article a couple days ago that he could see JC Jackson coming back to be playing at an all-pro level week 1, could also take him 8 to 10 weeks to get comfortable, and that's a huge range. And so I think it's important for us fans to realize that we should have some grace here, and I think be okay with a variety of outcomes. Fortunately, the Chargers do have some depth there, so they should allow him to have this time if he needs to take a few reps off, if he needs to take a week off to deal with some swelling or some soft tissue soreness or other things that are kind of quite common for soft tissue injuries like this in the recovery process. That's something that he will be allowed to do. So in terms of week 1, I think even when he sustained this injury, saying that he could play week 1 was sort of best case scenario. And here we are. I do expect him to play and have some semblance of snaps for this week 1 against Miami. I do expect him to be on some sort of pitch count. And what that will look like, I think, will be by game flow and how he's feeling, of course. But these soft tissue injuries are always something that 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So I do expect him to have, some swelling and things that he's going to have to work through as part of the injury. But I do expect him to play and potentially to an all-pro level again this season. So it just will remain to be seen. And I think I just want to give a special shout out to his recovery and the effort that he's put in, and the Chargers staff and training staff that have gotten him back to this point. I think it has been truly an incredible feat, and it's something that kind of speaks to the modern medical capacities and his resiliency to kind of put in that effort. So all props to him. I wish him all the best, but just have some grace early on in the season, especially. Let's talk briefly about the PUP players. Otito Ogbonnia had a similar injury, soft tissue with the patella tendon repair, a very serious injury. He's a player that needs more strength and explosiveness in terms of his defensive lineman position versus cornerback, but does still need to, rely on those muscles heavily. Jalen Guyton had the ACL reconstruction, again, another soft tissue injury. Both players were sort of in that 9 to 12 month recovery range, although they suffered their injuries, around the same time in the season. I think Otito's was a little bit later in week 10. Jalen Guyton's a little earlier in week 4. Both are not eligible to return until at the earliest week 5. But for them specifically, I don't expect the Chargers to rush them back. The Otito, in terms of the defensive linemen, they do have some depth there. The players, that group has played particularly well throughout the course of the preseason, so I do expect them to give him some time if he needs it. He is likely a little bit on the earlier range of his recovery time. We did see him taking reps in practice and working back on the side, and so I do expect him to start slowly working back into team reps once he's weaned off that list around week 5 and eventually reactivated. Jalen Guyton, on the other hand, is a little bit of a different story. The ACL tears tend to take a little bit longer and also tend to have a little bit longer of an on-ramp. The Chargers, similarly, though, do not need to rush him back. They do have some depth in the wide receiver room now. They do have some speed there in terms of Darius Davis and Quentin Johnson. So it'll remain to be seen what his role will be when he's back later in the season. But similarly, I don't expect them to rush to make that decision. So for both of these players, expect to see increasing activity around week 5, potential activations around week 7 or week 6, 7, 8. I'm thinking probably after the bye is where we see a lot of that activity for these two players specifically. Finally, Daiyan Henley. We talked ad nauseum last season about hamstring injuries because Keenan Allen dealt with a particularly bad one. There were a few other Chargers players. I think Donald Barham had one and, a couple other ones, but they're incredibly common injuries in the NFL. And 15.5% of players have a recurrence at some point in the season. So it's not something that teams take lightly. And even those players, when they do come back, they have a higher rate of injury of other extremities because of the hamstring injury, because of how it affects their biomechanics. So for this one, I didn't see exactly in the game where it happened. And it took until earlier this week for Brandon Staley to kind of mention this injury. But when it comes to week 1 and the expectations for Daiyan Henley, I'm not sure that we see him play this week, which, given the strength of his preseason, is a little bit of a bummer for Chargers players, or for Chargers fans, I mean. But it also speaks to the depth the Chargers have in the linebacker position, that they don't have to rush him back. So for Daiyan Henley, I expect them to take a little bit of time. I'm filming this video earlier in the week before we have a lot of practice reports out for the team, so I apologize. But I would keep an eye on that practice report and see how much he's participating in practice before we make any determinations on whether we see him in week 1. But I would not be surprised if we don't. And they do have some depth with Nick Niemann and Eamon Ogbonnia behind him. I apologize if I butchered that. So if they need to rest him for a week or 2 to kind of lower that risk of re-injury, I don't see them hesitating to do that. But he was exciting to watch in the preseason, and I'm excited to see him on the field. During the course of the season, I'm sure he'll return to some semblance of a snap share percentage during the course of the year. Last but not least, let's talk about Miami and some of the injuries that are relevant for the Chargers to be considering. Quickly, I'll just touch on the IR. Jalen Ramsey, of course, not playing. He suffered that meniscus injury and repair. Jeff Wilson Jr. has some finger midsection injuries, was placed on the PUP list as well for at least 4 weeks. Robert Jones is a left guard who's on that list as well. Will not be playing in this game. Those are some serious players, particularly Jalen Ramsey, to not have to deal with in the week 1, potentially opening more room for Justin Herbert in the passing attack. So we'll see how that plays into effect. These other 2 players, or the 3 players up top, Teron Armstead, Brandon Johnson, and Jalen Waddle. Brandon Johnson is a safety. He's coming back from an ACL injury. He probably won't play a ton of snaps this game. Again, this is his first competitive action. So similar to JC Jackson, I expect him to be in some semblance of a pitch count if he plays at all. Jalen Waddle had this kind of weird midsection injury, but I do expect him to play from all reports. And then the most interesting one is the left tackle, Teron Armstead. That's an all-pro left tackle that, if the Miami Dolphins don't have, would be open up some semblance of a feast day for Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack to go after. But there's been this kind of weird back and forth all preseason in terms of his lower leg injury. It's unclear if it's like a foot injury or if it's like a calf injury. It kind of goes back and forth. I've also read some reports that expect him to play this week, even though he's missed a lot of time, but he was not in practice today. So it will be something to keep your eyes on throughout the course of the week, because if he doesn't play, it's going to alter the Chargers' defensive schematics probably significantly as they try to attack that weaker side. And that's all I have for you guys. I appreciate all the kind words over the last season. I'm excited again to be back this year working with the team at the Guilty as Charged podcast, talking about the Chargers and injuries relevant to both their team and the teams that they play. If you have any other questions, feel free to message me or tweet at me at Chargers Medical. I'll try to get to everything that comes in. It's been a pleasure, again, working with the team and getting to work with and meet with all the fans over the course of last season. I'm excited to see where the Chargers go this year. Keep providing some injury analysis both here and there. So best of luck, bolt up, and let's see where the Chargers go this year. I'll see you guys soon.